The water poured down my body, warm and soothing, as I stood under the showerhead, the steady stream washing away the exhaustion from the day. Every muscle in my body seemed to relax, my mind starting to clear as the water cascaded over me. It had been one of those days, the kind where everything felt like a never-ending cycle of stress. And now, here in the quiet of the bathroom, I had this one moment to myself, just the sound of the water and the steam filling the air. The mirror was clouded with mist, and for a brief moment, I could pretend there was nothing else to think about but the way the water felt on my skin. But then, out of nowhere, I heard it, a soft knock on the bathroom door. It was so faint, I almost convinced myself it was just the sound of water hitting the tile. My heart skipped a beat. No one was supposed to be here. "Hey, are you in there?" The voice was quiet, but it hit me like a jolt. It was Ethan, my next-door neighbor. He'd had a key to my place for a while, something I'd given him when I trusted him to water the plants while I was out of town. That had been weeks ago, and I hadn't expected him to use it, not now, not without warning. I swallowed, my stomach flipping with an unexpected sense of discomfort. Yeah, I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm in the shower." There was a pause, just long enough for the silence to settle in the space between us, before I heard the creak of the door. It moved, ever so slightly, as if he was testing whether it would open. The warm, steamy air from the bathroom mixed with the cooler air from the hallway, and I felt my pulse quicken, a strange tension rising in my chest. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something about this moment made me uneasy. "Sorry to barge in," Ethan's voice came through, muffled but close enough that I knew he was standing right there, just on the other side of the door. His words were casual, but the proximity, the unexpectedness of it all, left me feeling exposed in a way I couldn't quite explain. "I knocked on the front door, but you didn't hear, so I thought I'd check in." I wiped the water from my face, trying to calm the unexpected flutter in my chest. "Is everything okay?" Yeah, he replied, but there was something hesitant in his voice. I just needed to talk to you about something. It's not urgent. I can wait." The sound of his voice, the way it wavered just slightly, sent a ripple of tension through me. Ethan and I had always been close, friendly, easygoing neighbors who exchanged pleasantries and helped each other out. But lately there had been something more, something unspoken between us, in the way our conversations lingered just a little too long, in the way his eyes seemed to hold mine just a bit longer than they should. "Give me a minute," I said, trying to shake off the strange feeling that had settled over me. I turned off the water, grabbed a towel, and wrapped it around myself before stepping out of the shower. When I opened the bathroom door, Ethan was standing there, leaning casually against the doorframe, but there was a tension in his posture that I hadn't seen before. His eyes flicked over me briefly, taking in the towel and the dampness of my skin, and I felt a flush rise in my cheeks, though I wasn't sure why. "Sorry," he said again, his voice softer now. "I didn't mean to interrupt." "It's fine," I replied, trying to act casual as I tightened the towel around me. "What's up?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, his eyes meeting mine, and there was something in his gaze that made my breath catch. It was subtle, but it was there, a flicker of something deeper, something more intense than the easygoing friendship we had always shared. "I don't know how to say this," he began, his voice low, almost uncertain, "but I've been thinking about us. About what's been going on between us lately." My heart skipped a beat. The tension I had felt bubbling beneath the surface over the past few weeks suddenly came crashing into focus. I'd been trying to ignore it, to pretend that it wasn't real, that the way Ethan looked at me, the way his hand would brush mine during casual interactions, didn't mean anything. But now, standing here in nothing but a towel, with his eyes locked on mine, I couldn't ignore it any longer. "I don't know what you mean," I said, though the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. Ethan stepped closer, just enough that I could feel the warmth of his body, the air between us thick with unspoken tension. "I think you do," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. I swallowed hard, my pulse racing. This wasn't supposed to happen. Ethan was my neighbor, my friend. We had always kept things light, easy. But now, with the way his eyes were searching mine, with the closeness of his body, everything felt charged, dangerous. I don't know if this is a good idea, I whispered, but even as I said it, I knew I didn't mean it. The pull between us was too strong, too undeniable. I don't either, Ethan admitted, his voice filled with the same conflict I was feeling. But I can't stop thinking about it, about you. His words hung in the air, heavy and filled with meaning, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. The air between us was thick with tension, with the weight of everything we hadn't said, everything we had been avoiding for weeks. Ethan's hand brushed against mine, a light, almost accidental touch, but it sent a jolt of electricity through me. I should have pulled away, should have stepped back and created some distance between us. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I let the moment linger, the quiet between us stretching, the unspoken feelings hanging heavy in the air. Ethan's hand slid up, his fingers brushing against my arm, and I felt a shiver run through me, my skin tingling with the weight of his touch. We shouldn't, I whispered, though my voice was weak, my resolve crumbling. I know, Ethan murmured, his breath warm against my skin as he leaned in closer, but it feels like we've been avoiding this for too long. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. He was right. We had been dancing around this for weeks, maybe even longer, and now, standing here, barely dressed, with Ethan so close I could feel the heat of his body, there was no denying it any longer. I don't know what to do, I admitted, my voice trembling with the weight of the moment. Ethan's hand slid up to my neck, his fingers brushing lightly against my skin, and I felt a rush of heat spread through me. We don't have to figure it all out right now, he said softly, but I don't want to pretend any more. His words hit me hard, and I realized that I didn't want to pretend any more either. The tension between us, the unspoken attraction, it was all too real, too powerful to ignore. Before I could stop myself, I closed the distance between us, pressing my lips to his in a kiss that was soft at first, tentative, as if we were both testing the waters. But the moment our lips touched, something inside me broke, and I couldn't hold back any longer. The kiss deepened, slow and intense, and I felt Ethan's arms wrap around me, pulling me closer. The towel slipped slightly, but I didn't care. All that mattered was the way his body felt against mine, the way his hands moved over my skin, the way my heart raced as the tension that had been building for so long finally spilled over. The kiss deepened, and I felt myself sinking into the intensity of it, losing track of everything else but the heat of Ethan's touch. His hands, now firm on my back, sent waves of electricity coursing through me, and all the thoughts of hesitation, of how wrong this might be, dissolved in the sensation of his closeness. The towel slipped even more, hanging loosely around my waist, but I didn't care. The only thing that mattered was the connection between us, something that had been lingering, unspoken, for far too long. Ethan's fingers brushed up the side of my neck, sending shivers down my spine as he gently pulled me closer, pressing our bodies together. I could feel the heat radiating off him, his breath warm against my lips as he broke the kiss for a brief moment, resting his forehead against mine. Our breaths were ragged, mingling in the charged air between us. We shouldn't be doing this, I whispered, my voice trembling with emotion. But even as I said it, I knew I didn't mean it. The attraction between us had been there for so long, simmering just beneath the surface, and now that we had crossed this line, there was no turning back. I know, Ethan murmured, his voice rough with desire, but I can't stop. Neither could I. His lips were on mine again, more urgent this time, and I felt the last bit of resistance in me give way. My hands found their way to his shoulders, gripping him as if I could anchor myself to this moment, to the intensity of what was happening between us. The warmth of his body against mine, the feel of his hands on my skin. It was overwhelming, intoxicating. I could feel the towel slipping further, but before I could think to adjust it, Ethan's hands were there, tugging it loose until it fell to the floor. I stood there, exposed, my body trembling under his gaze, but instead of feeling vulnerable, I felt alive. Like every nerve in my body was on high alert, like the air round us was humming with the energy of what we were about to do. Ethan's eyes met mine, and for a moment there was a flicker of hesitation in his gaze. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice soft, filled with concern. Despite the intensity of the moment, he was still my friend, still the person who had always been there for me, and I knew he was giving me a chance to step back, to stop this before it went any further. But I didn't want to stop. I couldn't. "I'm sure," I whispered, my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside me. Ethan's hand came up to cut my cheek, his thumb brushing lightly over my skin. "Okay," he whispered back, his voice filled with the same mix of desire and uncertainty that I felt. The next few moments were a blur of sensation. His hands were everywhere, on my back, my hips, pulling me closer, grounding me in the moment as we tumbled together. The heat between us was overwhelming, the tension that had been building for so long finally exploding into something we couldn't control. My body responded to his every touch, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps as we moved together, our skin slick with the steam from the shower still lingering in the air. We were tangled together now, no space left between us, and the intensity of it all was almost too much to bear. Ethan's lips found mine again, and the kiss was desperate, filled with the weight of everything we had been holding back. His hands slid down my sides and I could feel the strength in his grip, the way he was holding me as if I might slip away if he let go. But I wasn't going to let go, I was going to let go, I was going to let go, I was going over me, trying to believe that they were true. But the fear was still there, lingering in the background, reminding me that things had changed between us in a way that couldn't be undone. For now, though, I let myself stay in the moment, in the quiet intimacy of being close to him. I didn't have all the answers, and neither did he, but we were in this together. The days that followed were strange, filled with a new kind of tension between us. We didn't talk about what had happened, but it lingered in the air, always there, just beneath the surface. Every glance, every touch felt charged, as if we were both waiting for the other to bring it up, to make sense of the mess we had created. But neither of us did. We went on with our lives as if nothing had changed, but everything had, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing on the edge of something, unsure of whether to take the leap or step back. One evening, a few days after everything had happened, Ethan came over again, just like he always did. We sat in the living room, talking about nothing in particular, but the tension was still there, thick and undeniable. I could feel his eyes on me, could sense the shift in the air between us, and I knew that we couldn't keep avoiding it. Ethan's presence in the room was heavy, the air between us thick with unspoken tension. We sat on the couch, the TV flickering in the background, but neither of us was paying attention to it. I could feel his gaze on me, lingering just a little too long, and it sent a familiar rush of heat through my body. Every time we were in the same space since that night, the energy between us seemed to intensify, like we were both waiting for something to happen, but too afraid to make the first move. I glanced over at him, catching his eye for a brief second before looking away. My heart was racing, and I knew that this couldn't go on much longer. We were both pretending like nothing had changed, but everything had. That night in the shower had shifted something between us, and now we were stuck in this limbo, unable to move forward but unable to go back. Ethan shifted beside me, and I could feel the weight of his movements, the couch dipping slightly under his weight. He was close, too close, and the memory of how his hands had felt on me that night rushed back, making my pulse quicken. "I've been thinking," Ethan said suddenly, breaking the silence. His voice was soft, hesitant, like he was testing the waters before diving in. "About what happened?" I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. "Me too." He turned to face me, his expression serious, but there was a vulnerability in his eyes that made my heart ache. "I don't know how to handle this," he admitted, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I keep thinking about that night, and I don't know what to do." Neither did I. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words got caught in my throat. How could I explain the way I'd been feeling, the constant pull between us, the confusion, the guilt, the desire? It was all tangled up, and I didn't know how to unravel it. I don't want to ruin things between us, Ethan continued, his voice trembling slightly. But I also can't stop thinking about you. His words hit me like a punch to the gut, because they echoed exactly what I had been feeling. I had spent days trying to push the thoughts away, trying to pretend like everything could go back to normal, but it couldn't. Not after what we had shared, not after what we had felt. I don't want to ruin things either, I finally managed to say, my voice barely more than a whisper. But I don't know how to fix this. Ethan reached out, his hand brushing against mine, and the simple touch sent a jolt through me, just like it always did. Maybe we don't need to fix it, he said softly. Maybe we just need to figure out what this is. I looked up at him, my heart pounding in my chest. There was something in his eyes, something raw and real, that made me realize that he was just as scared as I was. But beneath that fear, there was something else, something deeper. I don't know what this is, I whispered, my voice trembling, but I can't stop thinking about you either. The silence between us was heavy, charged with all the things we weren't saying. Ethan's hand tightened around mine, his thumb brushing gently over my skin, and I felt the same pull I had felt that night in the shower, the same undeniable connection that had brought us to this point. Without thinking, I leaned in, closing the distance between us. Ethan's breath hitched, but he didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned in too, and before I knew it, our lips were touching again, soft and tentative at first, but quickly deepening into something more. Something that felt inevitable. The kiss was slow, filled with the weight of everything we had been holding back, and as Ethan's hand slid up to cup the back of my neck, pulling me closer, I felt my heart racing, my body responding to him in ways I couldn't control. We broke apart just long enough to catch our breath, our foreheads resting together, and I could feel the heat radiating off of him, the tension between us thick and undeniable. I can't stop, Ethan whispered, his voice ragged. I don't want to stop. Neither did I. In that moment, all the fear, all the guilt seemed to fall away, replaced by the intensity of the connection we shared. I kissed him again, harder this time, and he responded in kind, his hands pulling me closer, our bodies pressing together as the tension that had been building for so long finally spilled over. Everything else faded away, the confusion, the doubts, the outside world. All that mattered was Ethan, the feel of his skin against mine, the way our bodies moved together, perfectly in sync. We tumbled back onto the couch, and I could feel the heat between us intensify, our hands exploring, our breaths coming in short, desperate gasps. It was overwhelming, the sensation of being so close to him, of finally giving in to the attraction that had been simmering between us for weeks. But just as quickly as it had begun, the weight of what we were doing started to settle in again. The reality of it all, the fact that we were crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed, came crashing down on me, and I pulled back slightly, my heart pounding in my chest. Ethan's eyes met mine, and I could see the same conflict in his gaze, the same mix of desire and guilt that was twisting inside of me. We shouldn't, I started, but the words felt hollow, even as I said them. I know, Ethan replied, his voice filled with the same uncertainty I felt, but I don't want to stop. Neither did I. For a long moment we just lay there, tangled together, both of us breathing heavily, trying to make sense of the mess we had created. The intensity of the moment still lingered in the air, but the reality of what we had done was beginning to sink in. I don't know how to fix this, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. I don't know if we can. Ethan was quiet for a moment, his hand still resting gently on my waist. Maybe we don't need to fix it, he said softly. Maybe we just need to figure out what this means. I looked at him, my heart aching with the weight of everything we had just shared. I didn't know what this meant. I didn't know if we could go back to being just neighbors, just friends, but I also didn't know if I wanted to. I don't want to lose you, I said, my voice trembling with emotion. You won't, Ethan replied, his eyes soft, filled with the same vulnerability I was feeling. We'll figure this out. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was filled with a quiet understanding. We didn't have all the answers, but we were in this together. And for now, that was enough. We untangled ourselves slowly, the tension still lingering, but there was a softness to the moment now, a kind of quiet intimacy that hadn't been there before. Ethan reached out, brushing a strand of hair away from my face, his touch gentle, reassuring. "I don't know what's going to happen," he admitted softly, "but I'm not going anywhere." I smiled, a small tentative smile, and for the first time in days, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. We had crossed a line, and there was no going back, but maybe that was okay. Maybe this was the beginning of something new, something real. As we sat there together, the quiet of the evening settling around us, I realized that whatever happened next, we would face it together. The uncertainty was still there, but the fear was starting to fade, replaced by the quiet certainty of the connection we had always shared. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story.